The Cathar Dominion, a vast interstellar empire built on the bedrock of pure, unassailable logic, considered themselves masters of the predictable. Their society functioned like a perfectly calibrated chronometer, every action weighed, every outcome calculated. Emotions, to the Cathar, were messy, inefficient variables, unfortunate biological quirks in less developed species. And humanity was a prime example. The Cathar archives, meticulously cross-referenced and updated by the nanosecond, classified Homo sapiens as Tier 7, developing intelligence, high emotional volatility, low sustained focus. Humans, according to Cathar behavioral analysts, were creatures of fleeting passions. They could be angered, yes, but their fury was like a sudden squall, intense, but quickly passing. Offer a human logical recompense for an error, a sensible solution to a grievance, and their agitation would subside. The incident filed away in their chaotic minds and soon forgot. Their grudges were deemed superficial, easily soothed by the balm of reason. This understanding, or misunderstanding, informed the Cathar's decision regarding the minor asteroid belt designated K-alpha. The belt orbited a dim red star at the edge of Cathar-explored space. More importantly, it drifted inconveniently close to a projected hyperspace lane vital for the expansion of their burgeoning synth-silk trade. The most logical solution was to adjust the belt's trajectory. This adjustment, unfortunately, would send a small fraction of its debris field on a slow, decades-long path through the Oort cloud of a nearby system. A system inhabited by a small, independent human colony named Ethelberg. High Planner Vrel, overseeing the K-alpha adjustment project, ran the calculations. The risk to Ethelberg was minimal, a slight increase in meteoroid activity in their outer system in approximately 60 standard Terran years. The colony itself was well shielded. The emotional distress, value for the humans, was calculated as moderate but temporary. The proposed compensation package, a generous shipment of advanced atmospheric filtration units and 3 standard tons of refined quantium ore, was deemed more than sufficient to offset any perceived inconvenience. The humans will posture, analyst Porth stated during the final review, his multifaceted eyes blinking slowly. They will express displeasure. Standard emotional displays. We will present the compensation. They will accept. The matter will be concluded. Their memory of such minor slights is notoriously short. Vrel nodded, a gesture of curt agreement. Proceed as calculated. A Cathar diplomatic vessel, sleek and silver as a drawn blade, arrived in orbit of Ethelberg a few weeks later. The colony was small, a cluster of domes and agricultural modules clinging to a terraformed moon. The Cathar emissary, Subdirector Tikel, delivered the news to the Colony Council. He spoke in calm, measured tones, explaining the necessity of the asteroid belt's rerouting, the minor potential long-term effects, and the generous compensation package offered. The Human Council members listened. Their faces, unlike the Cathar's impassive carapaces, flickered with unreadable expressions. There was no shouting, no table pounding, none of the high emotional volatility the Cathar databases predicted for such a provocation. The council leader, an older woman named Sarah Evans, simply looked at Tikel for a long moment. "We understand the Cathar Dominion's logistical needs," she said finally, her voice quiet, "and we accept your compensation." Tikel registered the slight pause before compensation, but logged it as within acceptable parameters of human linguistic inefficiency. The humans signed the data slate, accepting the terms. The atmospheric filters and quantium ore were offloaded. The Cathar vessel departed. Back on the Cathar homeworld, the Ethelberg file was closed. Incident K-alpha 773, resolution satisfactory, human emotional response, subdued, compliant, long-term impact on Cathar-human relations, negligible. The synth-silk trade route flourished. The Cathar Dominion continued its logical, orderly expansion. 60 Terran years passed, then 70, then 80. The Cathar Dominion reached its zenith, a beacon of order in a chaotic galaxy. Their systems were flawless, their network secure, their understanding of the universe, they believed, nearly complete. The Ethelberg incident was a forgotten footnote in a minor subarchive, an insignificant interaction with an insignificant species. The first hint that something was amiss was so subtle it was almost imperceptible. A fractional power dip in a tertiary processing unit on Cathar Prime. A single, corrupted data packet in the agricultural archives of Xylos. A navigational beacon that flickered off for 3.7 seconds before reigniting. These were logged as standard entropy, the universe's background hiss of imperfection. Cathar systems were designed with triple and quadruple redundancies. Such minor blips were self-correcting. But the blips didn't stop. They grew slowly, insidiously. A regional atmospheric regulator on the industrial world of T-Core Prime went offline during a critical pressure adjustment, causing a week-long shutdown of 3 major fabrication plants. The official report cited unexpected cascade failure due to unforeseen resonance with local geological activity. It was logical. It was plausible. It was wrong. A deep space communication relay linking the core worlds to the outer rim territories began experiencing intermittent signal degradation. Cathar engineers, the finest in the galaxy, spent months trying to isolate the cause, blaming solar flares, then exotic particle interference. They replaced entire modules, rerouted signals, but the problem persisted, like an itch they couldn't quite scratch. Then came the Marklo Nexus event. The Marklo Nexus was one of the Cathar Dominion's central data hubs, a moon-sized sphere of interconnected processors and memory banks, the brain of an entire sector. Without warning, during a routine diagnostic, it simply ceased. Not an explosion, not a catastrophic power surge. It just went dark. One moment it was the galaxy's most sophisticated information processing center. The next it was a cold, silent rock. Panic, an emotion the Cathar prided themselves on having transcended, began to whisper through their perfect networks. The loss of Marklo was not just a system failure, it was an impossibility. Their logic could not compute it. Across the Dominion, the subtle malfunctions began to accelerate, to coalesce. Automated shipping fleets experienced cascading navigational errors, leading to collisions and lost cargo. Planetary defense grids showed ghost signatures or failed to lock onto legitimate targets. Financial algorithms, the lifeblood of Cathar commerce, began to spit out irrational numbers, causing widespread economic disruption. The Cathar High Council convened in emergency session. Their logical framework was failing them. This was not random decay. This was targeted. This was deliberate. But by whom? No known enemy possessed the capability to infiltrate and disrupt Cathar systems on such a vast, almost invisible scale. The attacks, for they had to be attacks, were like a cancer, growing unseen within the Cathar's own meticulously ordered body. It was Archivist Threll who was tasked with the impossible. Threll was an anomaly among the Cathar. While others focused on the hard logic of physics and engineering, Threll found a strange fascination in the soft sciences, the cultures, histories, and psychologies of other species. His colleagues considered his pursuits quaint, a harmless eccentricity. Now, with their empire crumbling around them, the High Council, in an act bordering on desperation, ordered Threll to search every record, every interaction, however minor, for any clue, any overlooked variable. Threll began his work. He waded through millennia of Cathar history, through diplomatic cables, trade agreements, and military reports. He found nothing. No grand enemy, no hidden galactic power with a motive or the means. Days turned into weeks. The Cathar infrastructure continued its slow, inexorable decay. He was looking for a sophisticated enemy, a logical adversary. Then, sifting through low-priority archives, his optical sensors flickered across a file flagged Tier 7 species interaction, resolution satisfactory. File K-Alpha 773. The Ethelberg colony, he almost dismissed it. A minor asteroid rerouting. A small human settlement. Compensated. Forgotten. But something in the report snagged his attention. The human response. Subdued, compliant. Threll cross-referenced this with standard Cathar projections for human emotional responses to perceived territorial infringements. The data didn't align. Humans, when provoked, were typically loud, expressive, and quick to anger, but also quick to forgive if the apology or compensation was deemed fair. Subdued and compliant was an outlier, driven by a flicker of something his logical mind couldn't quite define, perhaps intuition, a concept he'd only read about in human texts. Threll requested access to the newly declassified and translated archives of human psychological studies. Most Cathar scholars dismissed these texts as primitive emotional ramblings, full of illogical concepts and unquantifiable feelings. Threll began to read. He read about grudges, the human capacity to nurse a grievance for years, even generations. He read about vendettas, feuds passed down through families. He read about something called the Long Con, a meticulously planned deception carried out over extended periods. And then he found it, a short, almost academic treatise on a uniquely human concept: spite. The text described spite as a desire to harm, annoy, frustrate, or humiliate another person, often for trivial reasons, and sometimes even when it results in harm to oneself or requires disproportionate effort. Disproportionate effort. Trivial reasons. A cold dread, an emotion Threll had only theorized about, began to crystallize in his core processors. He re-examined the Ethelberg incident, the minor inconvenience, the rerouted asteroids, the 60-year delay before any potential impact, the calm, almost unnervingly quiet acceptance by the Human Council leader, Sarah Evans. He cross-referenced the timeline. The Ethelberg incident occurred 87 standard Terran years ago. The first subtle Cathar system anomalies began approximately 20 Terran years after that, 67 years ago. Small things. A slightly miscalibrated sensor here. A data packet rerouted through a less optimal pathway there. The kind of tiny, almost undetectable acts of sabotage that, if done by a single operative, would be dismissed as error. But if done by thousands, or tens of thousands, all working with infinitesimal precision over decades. Threll pulled up schematics of early Cathar infiltration programs designed for information gathering. Humans had access to these through legitimate academic exchanges decades ago. The Cathar had deemed them too simplistic, too easily detectable to be a threat. But what if they weren't used for overt attack? What if they were modified, subtly, patiently, to introduce not catastrophic failures, but tiny, almost statistical degradations? Microscopic seeds of chaos, planted in the fertile ground of Cathar's own hypercomplex systems. The historian projected a map of the Cathar Dominion, overlaid with the spreading systemic failures. Then he projected the known locations of human diaspora populations, trade outposts, even individual human specialists who had, over the decades, worked within Cathar systems as engineers, programmers, maintenance technicians, often in low-level, overlooked positions. The Cathar had always welcomed cheap, efficient labor from lesser species. The patterns correlated with horrifying precision. The Cathar hadn't been fighting a technologically superior foe. They hadn't been outmaneuvered by a cunning military strategist. They had been slowly, meticulously, and almost invisibly dismantled from within, not for resources, not for territory, not out of grand ideological conflict. They had been dismantled because they had annoyed a small human colony. The sheer, patient, multi-generational dedication to such an act of cosmic-scale petty revenge was beyond Cathar comprehension. The resources involved, the decades of silent, coordinated effort, the unwavering commitment to a goal born from a minor, compensated slight. It was illogical. It was insane. It was terrifyingly, undeniably human. Archivist Threll, his logical mind reeling from the implications, prepared his report. His manipulators trembled as he typed. The Cathar hadn't underestimated human technology or human military might. They had underestimated human spite. They had dismissed a fundamental aspect of the human psyche as a mere emotional quirk, and that dismissal was now costing them their empire. When Threll presented his findings to the High Council, the initial reaction was stunned silence. Then came disbelief, followed by a dawning, species-wide horror that transcended any emotion they had previously experienced or catalogued. Their logical models, their predictive algorithms, their entire understanding of cause and effect shattered. How could they fight an enemy whose motivations were so profoundly, terrifyingly irrational? An enemy who would burn down their own house just to ensure a single Cathar got smoke in its eyes. The Cathar Empire was crippled. The damage was too deep, too pervasive. The human code, as it came to be known, was woven into the very fabric of their infrastructure. Trying to purge, it was like trying to remove individual threads from a tapestry without unraveling the whole thing. They could slow the decay, patch the worst of it, but the Cathar dominion, as it was over. In a final, desperate act, perhaps driven by a need to warn others, or perhaps simply to understand the abyss they had stumbled into, the Cathar broadcast Threll's findings to the galactic conquered. The message was stark. Beware the humans. Their memory is long, their patience infinite, and their capacity for disproportionate retribution for perceived slights is a force beyond logical comprehension. Humanity's standing in the galaxy changed overnight. They were no longer seen as emotional, inefficient, or a minor curiosity. They were viewed with a new, profound sense of awe and cosmic dread. Species that had considered exploiting Earth's resources or dictating terms to the young human race quietly shelved their plans. Diplomats approaching human representatives did so with extreme caution, triple-checking every word, every gesture, lest they inadvertently cause offense. And on Cathar Prime, amidst the flickering lights and failing systems of their dying empire, a new proverb was coined, whispered in hushed tones in the data streams and echoing in the silent halls of their once great institutions. Never inconvenience a human, not even slightly, for their spite can unravel the stars themselves. A junior Cathar technician, working late in a crumbling data archive, paused as a human liaison officer walked past, one of the few still permitted, mostly as observers to the slow collapse. The technician used to see such beings as primitive. Now, as the human offered a polite, almost imperceptible nod, the Cathar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the failing environmental controls. He saw not an inefficient biped, but the patient, smiling face of a universe that had suddenly become far more dangerous and far less predictable than his logic could ever have prepared him for.